yoga brand. I could go on about this and I want to hear your thoughts because I think branded yoga is such a fascinating concept. Why am I attracted to a certain type of even studio physical space over a different one? And I don't want to be stuck on this idea that brand only just means a logo. I think it's a lot of things beyond that. You and I talk about brand a lot because, how a video is produced is part of the brand. How people connect with us through different channels is part of the brand. Our competitors in the world that have chosen different feelings for and we know that they are speaking to a completely different audience than us. My name is Ula. If you can't tell, I'm obsessed with brands. That's kind of my background, and it's how I got connected with Heart and Bones Yoga. So I'm the brand obsessed person behind the scenes, writing not only just our Monday emails to our members, but having debates like this with Brea about brand and the future of Heart and Bones Yoga. So writing blogs, looking at content, all that kind of stuff. That's like where my bread and butter happy place is.
And you're so good at it. And our brand, you've really brought our brand awareness in terms of like us as a business, how it's helped really clarify and elevate that. So a lot of hi, I'm Brea. Most people see me as teacher, but they don't realize that I've actually run businesses, like a yoga business, for as long as I've been teaching, really. I used to own a brick and mortar yoga studio back in 2004 or 5. I was actually trying to remember this the other day. It's early mid 2000s. And then of course, Heart and Bones Online since the official online studio and platform and teacher training since 2018. But Heart and Bones had been gestating pre that for about like 2016.
When you had your physical studio, was like brand top of mind? I mean, even before you owned your studio, you were like a teacher. So like as a teacher, were you like, it's important. Everyone has to have their own personal brand now. Did you have a personal brand as a yoga teacher? And did you care about brand when you opened your physical studio?
Oh, this is such a great question. So me inherently, I have always rejected conformity. And I've really I think I mentioned this in a previous episode of just like, I very consciously became a punk in high school, grunge. I was like, I don't want to play this game. This is crap. I'm going to wear the weirdest clothes I can. F you all. So I kind of am somebody when things are mainstream. I'm just like, no, that's not me. So when it comes to brand and me as a early brand new yoga teacher, first of all, I think contextually, this was again the early 2000s, the community that I was teaching in, like yoga was only just starting to grow. So you didn't have to differentiate yourself. I think just it was a bunch of us young people and a bunch of old ladies in tights, wonderful old ladies in tights, but like that older generation who were teaching yoga since the 70s and just like we're now older, and then us new kids came in and we're like, ooh, yoga. And so you didn't really have to brand yourself because there was only a handful of us in those early days. But then by the time I opened up my yoga studio, well, first of all, it wasn't something that I aimed for. I think I was 24 years old, 25. I had the opportunity. I knew a friend of mine had opened up or bought a building downtown, and he's like, there's a space that would be perfect for a yoga studio. Have you ever thought of owning a yoga studio? And I was like, no, I'm young. I'll do that when I'm in my 40s, which I am now, funny. But he made it really sweet for me and a really sweet deal. And so then I did, and that was the start of that brick and mortar studio. And again, this was early days in this yoga scene at the time. I think it was probably the third or fourth studio that even existed at the time. And so
this was in Edmonton, right?
Yeah.
So you were like one of the...
Yeah. Oh yeah. This was one of like really, I think there was some peripheral small ones, but I think it was like maybe the third sort of main one at the time. And then there is this part of me that's also, I have a marketing brain. I enjoy that. I enjoy business. I'm not formally trained. I didn't go to school for any of this, but it's just kind of happened naturally. So when the opening up the studio sort of fell into my lap, in a sense, the business side of things were pretty decent and felt comfortable. So when it came to brand, I don't know if I had the word brand, but I definitely knew the vibe, even to the point, and I always said this, the teachers who taught, and because people would come and ask for a job and they'd give their like yoga teacher resume and stuff. And they were probably really great people, but the teachers that I ended up hiring all had a certain je ne sais quoi. They had a certain something that I could not write down. I could not put my finger on, but I knew if they were going to fit the energy of my yoga studio. So that was brand. but it was a very intuitive thing. It was very much like, and actually even to the point where people would start to come in. So we were creating that vibe. The teachers all had a certain something. The way that I used photos, like I'd never, and I still to this day don't like to do like photos and very intentionally like, here's my leg around my head type poses. It was always very just like intentional, which again is brand. But it got to the point that I would even know the type of people who would be our students. I could clock it right away. I would have people come in and I'd be like, you're never going to come back here. This is not your place.
You were intuitive brand building. That's so interesting because these are the questions I would ask clients. Like, who's your avatar? Who is the ideal person? And I think these are such good things to talk about when it comes to teaching yoga. Even if you choose to never own a studio, even if you choose to never, become like an entrepreneur of any kind, and you just like show up at a class, I think knowing who your ideal student is could really help you flourish as a teacher, because then you're not trying to make everyone happy. And you will never make everyone happy. It's impossible that every student who walks through your doors will be happy. So why torture yourself? Why not just be really great for the right student?
Yeah, agreed. And when those people would walk through the door and I would know, I'd be like, yeah, they're not going to enjoy this class. They're not going to enjoy our vibe. They're not going to enjoy this studio. I'm not going to see them again. It never bothered me because that was so clear. Right. It was like, I know what we are, and they're not going to find whatever that was here. And then those who came. And then it got to the point, then what was really lovely about that, it got to the point, remember, I would go to teach classes and I'd have to drag people in from the lobby. I'm like, okay, stop chatting, everyone. Like, come on, let's time for class, because it was really community focused. And which was brand, which was like, I keep using the word vibe because there is a feeling. And there's another example of this later on where I was starting to then move into more anatomy informed teaching. And at the time, there was somebody else in the world that was kind of doing something similar to me. And when I looked at, like, actually, there was like a handful of other people, and all of us had different colors on our, even though we were kind of teaching the same thing, the colors they chose on their website were very different from the colors I chose on my website. And then I had, as an example, then I had to trust, then as the consumer, the student looking at both of our stuff, who on the outset seems very similar, I had to trust that those who were going to go, again, this is such a surface level thing, but it's a part of the brand, that, okay, I like the color of what Breeze, like, because that's the whole feeling. Let's say like pinks and blues, and maybe the other one was like red and black. And like, those are very different feeling things. So even though the content of what we were teaching might have been similar, the way that we were doing had it our own flavor. And I had to just trust those who are going to like my flavor is going to go, and those who don't. And people probably liked both as well.
It's interesting because my background is graphic design. That's where my education is. So, and I still do brand work sporadically, a couple projects a year. And the funniest thing is that to this day, still people will be like, okay, but all my competitors look like this, so I should look like them because I want to be competing with those people. And you're like, great, you're just going to blend into the crowd. And there's this level of like, there's a couple things there. First off, I do understand, let's say as a yoga studio, you have to look like a yoga studio. Like, people will go to you if they can't tell what you offer them, then that's very confusing. Of course, you need to signal, hi, I'm a yoga studio. But if you start looking like absolutely everybody else, then you have to ask yourself, why am I choosing you instead of everybody else? And if it's going to be just price, you're going to have a race to the bottom, right? If it's just like, well, I'm cheaper than everybody else, I'm like, you are going to hate your life, because it's just going to be a constant slide down towards pricing, right? So we actually have to get really clear on who you are and who you want to attract. And that's so important. So do you remember a time where you became like, because you mentioned you started thinking anatomy. Now I'm starting to think these guys have red and black. Maybe I should go with blue. Is that kind of the first time where you were like visual identity as brand, or like I have to like visually look different than everybody else? Is that like your first conscious, like, I gotta stand out?
Great question. I think it probably inherently happened with the yoga studio. I was lucky I had to really great friends who were designers and helped with like the logo and the colors that we decided to paint on the walls. And again, the feeling, I think there's a design part of me, the artist in me is just kind of has that, like, I'm aware of aesthetic, I care about aesthetic, I like aesthetic, which would be another way of sort of the brand. Because again, like, well, what feeling do we want in here? It should be these colors. I don't want black walls. I don't want this, or whatever it may be. And so I think it was conscious all along, but definitely honed over the years for sure. And learning, and the combination of that too is also learning to trust my choices, trust the aesthetic that I'm choosing. Because again, as we've already been saying, that's, people are going to like it or they're not. And that's sort of a natural, easy filter for us. Our brand can be a way of filtering the people we want and don't want. And I don't mean like, well, I don't want you, you can't come, but like, right, there's just, as you said, and as I think we say, I think our subtitle for this series should just be, not everybody's going to like you. Because I think it comes out in every single conversation as teachers, as we talk about this, and not everybody's going to like it. And that's okay. So trust that. It doesn't mean it's wrong.
What came into my mind, and what the way I think of brand as well, is a promise. And I think that actually answers the question of like, well, why is it okay that not everyone likes me? Because you're actually, through brand, promising an experience or a product or something like that. So if let's say on the outside, we present Heart and Bones Yoga as this like hardcore gym bro, anatomy, go hard brand, and it's black colors with people in, bras and like ripped muscles, and that's the promise we're making. And it's not bad. But if that's the promise, and then you enter the studio and you decide to commit to a trial and paying for 1 month, and you come inside and you realize, oh, Brea is this like super empathetic, kind person. There's all these teachers with like pain management and options, and I can do meditations, and yes, I could even lift weights. There's a weight option here for, but I don't see anyone deadlifting. And I don't see someone screaming at me to push harder. Okay, well, you just broke your promise. And I would be upset. I would be upset with that person. And so that's another way you could look at brand. You don't have to have it all figured out, but like, what promise are you making to that person?
That's such a good example. Absolutely. And neither one of those examples are good or bad. This isn't binary. Yeah. It's like, you just have to follow through, or vice versa. Or you're like, comes across as which we are, empathetic and wonderful and kind to everybody, heart and bones. But yeah, what if it was like, that's what what we're showing, and then people come in and it is the opposite of like, yeah, we're like, just go sweat like that, like, way to lose a person, right? So I love that the brand is your promise to people, and are we following through? So anybody listening to that, hopefully you're nodding your head, being like, well, what's the promise that I make? And you don't have to have a business around this. You as a yoga teacher, you are your own brand. And if you cringe just hearing that, that's fair. That's absolutely fair, because that's the marketing has been gross and can be gross and not feel good, or you maybe don't like putting yourself out there. And I'm like, well, I'm not a brand, I'm me. It's like, well, yes, and you are still a brand whether you like it or not, because you do teach in a certain way. You are going to have a website you have to make a choice of colors. You have to make a choice on the words. So hopefully this is an easeful way from what Ula offered, which was like, yeah, what's your promise that you're making for people? And how are you continuing that promise?
Everyone will have their preferences. You can never guess what they are. Each person will be different. So you just got to do what you got to do to, I think, build the type of career that you're happy with.
Yeah.
It has to be authentic to you too. Like, you can't fake it.
Yeah. And get help. And if you sort of get a little, because I'm trying to think again, I'm going in my mind, I actually realize through this conversation how much of a brand snob I am, not necessarily in the yoga space, but in like, if I'm at a store or I'm at a health food store looking at like lotions at some, like, I am really snobby about fonts. I'm snobby about design. And I know this, and I know this is not accurate, this is how strong brand is. I will see something that's not well designed, and it could be the best product in the world. It could be the thing, if I'm like looking at a moisturizer or something, that's going to change my life, make me look young forever, or whatever it is. But if that brand, if that design on the label is not up to in my own particular standards, I'm not going to buy it. And I'm sure we all have are doing that consciously or unconsciously. So don't feel pressure, by the way, that you have to be that. I think actual products, handheld, like things like that's a little bit different. But if this brand conversation does scare you, or you don't actually have that aesthetic brain and you don't actually know what looks good, and you're like, what are you talking about? I never notice labels or whatever that might be, then find friends. You probably have a friend who does have that eye a little bit or is a designer, and work with them, talk to them and brainstorm with them. Hey, what would look good? How do I do this? Because it all matters.
I don't know if you'll touch on this on the mentorship, but I feel like at some point, maybe you will, maybe it'll be in the teacher training, because people do most likely want to build a sustainable career. And you can call it brand, you can call it brand promise, vibe. I don't care. But let's say your extent of your full marketing as a yoga teacher is Instagram, right? Like, we could talk social and brand as well. How you show yourself on these public platforms as part of your marketing is important. And there's a reason, like, I could go on about the idea of like, oh, I posted this thing and didn't get as much traction. And then you look at it and the person typically is posting about yoga, but then this time is posting about their dog. And you're like, well, you broke your promise. Why are you posting your dog when you're supposed to be posting about yoga? Like, they followed you for the yoga. So I think it does seep into other aspects as well. And we might not call it, quote unquote, like actually brand. And maybe people think when I say brand, I'm talking about logos. But that's just like this tiny little piece of your brand. That's a visual representation. So it's almost like if I had to give people homework, it's like sit down and journal about that promise.
That's great homework. What other type of homework would you give? So let's say you were talking to, because you are talking to yoga teachers right now, and having been one yourself, having worked professionally as a brand developer, designer, in all sorts of spaces, not just the yoga space. Like, what do you think? And knowing too, and I'm going to throw in one question on that for you, knowing that, as we've named in previous episodes, like yoga teachers have imposter syndrome. Many are very like feel icky about marketing. What's a way that what's some like what would be some fun homework to give them? So I like the brand promise journal. I think that alone is going to be powerful.
It's funny because I built like a little mini brand of my own for yoga. I did something called City Yoga X in Edmonton. I decided to do by donation yoga. Like, I think of brand also as like problem solving, taking a step away from it where it is personal, but it isn't personal. I'm actually solving a problem. And my problem was, how do I attract a diverse amount of students that are okay not going to a yoga studio, where they're not going to have a shower, where they're not going to have a change room, even they're not going to have access to any of that stuff. And instead, we're going to work with local businesses. So we're going to have yoga in an art gallery. We're going to have yoga at the, vegan cafe after they close. So I'm trying to attract a certain type of person, and that's the problem I had to solve. The second problem I had to solve was, how do I show other teachers when none of us are going to book a photo session, when no one's going to invest in these like extra little things? So they're going to just send me whatever photo it is that they have, and I have to make it work. So to me, actually, I was like really helpful to think about these problems that I would have to tackle visually through brand and communication, so I can make that promise and keep it. So when I post or want to share about a class, I'm not over promising and telling you that there is going to be like some scented, beautiful bathroom with hot towels. Like, no, girl, we're moving tables to the side and you're going to be on the floor of a cafe. But guess what? It's going to be phenomenal. So that's actually how I approached brand for yoga. I was just being really clear on what I wanted to solve, who I wanted to show up to my class. And then the next step was actually also looking around at that differentiation. Was there anyone else in the marketplace doing what I was doing? No. There was 0 people. So I, in a sense, was like really lucky. I get to like create from scratch what the visual identity of this was. And I can say that I actually chose to go with like black and white photos and very like minimal, and it allowed everyone to send the craziest photos, and it allowed us to, it was super fun, and it allowed me to even just show up with my like phone and take photos with my phone. And it was just, it all worked. But I was very clear on who I wanted to be there and what the problems were going to be. Because I think what happens often with building brands, people make it so personal to themselves, and they say, well, I like this thing, I like these colors, I like this font. And yes, there's a degree of that, but you're going to hit roadblocks really quickly. And my biggest piece of advice in that is like, what are your roadblocks? Like, let's say you are just going to ever be on Instagram. You're never going to hire a professional photographer. That's a roadblock. How are you going to solve for that? That's going to impact your brand. Let's say you're going to have a website. Okay, that's like one step up. Are you going to hire a photographer? Look around your city. Do I have access to somebody? Can I invest in this? Like, there's these little roadblocks, and it's not really complicated. It's very much like you can sit down and journal about this for, 20 minutes a day for the next week, and you'll soon discover, okay, you know what? My roadblock is I'm never going to have access to a photographer. So my brand is going to feel very casual. It's going to feel very approachable. I'm going to take photos of my home. I'm going to show that I do yoga in my backyard. That's my brand. Or maybe you're like, I actually do have access to this fantastic studio I'm teaching out of. I'm going to talk to the studio owner. This is my space I'm going to work within. I'm going to book aside an evening after a class and even use my phone or bring a photographer, and it's going to look professional. I'm going to guide people to these classes in a studio. So I think it's like there's no perfect answer, but know what your problems are going to be off the hop, so you can just kind of get ahead of that.
Such a good answer. Yeah, everybody should listen to that 5 more times. Because it's true, because those roadblocks don't mean that something's wrong with you. They don't mean that it's all going to fail. They don't mean, and especially even pointing out the fact that you were the only one doing it. I know some people would be doing that and go, oh, well, then this must not be a good idea because nobody else is doing it.
I was so excited. I only knew of one other studio at the time that was doing it, and that's what actually inspired me. They were in Hawaii. And so I, no joke, had someone cover my classes. I went on vacation, and while on vacation, the studio I worked at shut down without warning. So I came back to like no yoga job. And I thought, this is it. I'm just doing my own thing. And I mentioned to my friend how frustrated I was. And she said, hey, there's this studio out in Hawaii who does this by donation thing. I don't know how they do it. And I just like figured it out. Like I fumbled through it, but it was super great. And like I had a lot of fun doing it. So I think like not being afraid as well. Just like you can be the first.
That is so huge, Ula. I think so many of us stop ourselves before we even start. There's a 5 million reasons why that wouldn't have worked. You could have told yourself, like, again, nobody else is doing this. This can't be a good idea because nobody else thought of it. And that's how I've been able to do pretty much my entire life, I feel, is just this sort of like audacious belief in myself / seeing the fear and doing it anyway. Because my self-belief isn't just like, I'm like, yeah, everything's going to be great. Always like, no, I feel like anytime I've done, I call it like, it's a leap of faith, and it is side by side with fear. It's like, it's like, oh, okay, I kind of think this will work. Let's try it. And then the fear is also there. And it's like, it's not going to work. Nah. You just maybe got to let the fear be slightly less loud, but it's not like it's going to go away ever. And so I love and I call it audacious because you kind of just have to like audaciously do these things and you'll be surprised, or it might fail. And that's also part of it because it's all part of our learning, and you're always going to get something out of it, even when it quote fails.
I was going to say, I think you and I, one thing we say a lot is like, you can change your mind. Like we can try something and then you could be like, I didn't like it, and we can change our mind. And I can literally list examples that you and I have done that we like started something and then we're many. Like, no, like it doesn't have to be the perfect reason. Sometimes it's like, I actually really just didn't like that. I don't want to continue it. It's literally your life and your business.
And that's what business is. That's what running your business is. This is what being a human is. It's like no different. And I think this sort of gatekeepery feeling of like professionalism, again, as we talk a lot about, of just, well, I'm running, and I always do the voice for these things of like, I'm running this yoga studio. I'm this yoga teacher. I have to be this way. And it's like, even the most professional people in the world we're making it up. We're making it up. It's all trial and error. There might be some proven things that do help. There are proven things that do help in like brand and marketing. And at the same time, you aren't going to move forward in your life until you sort of like give yourself that opportunity just to leap and trust and watch what happens. In my mind, I always go back to my favorite examples of this, of like So with painting and drawing and doing art, it's such a, for me, it's such a wonderful reminder and mini microcosm of that. Sometimes I'll paint or draw something where I'm like, oh my God, I did that. Ooh. And then there's other times in the same session, let's say if I'm going to like a life drawing night, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to burn this piece of thing. And at the same time, the thing that came out well and came out not well, none of it matters because I've learned in each one. Each time I've done something where I'm okay with the outcome, whatever it might be, I learn from it. And so I love that little microcosm of like that moment of like, okay, none of this matters to the bigger things that do feel like they matter more because your business is on the line. Okay, we're spending money. Is this going to work? Is that going to work? But I think it's important to still have that.
Yeah, I think what you touched on something is really important. There's a distinction between, there's phases of growth, right? And I'm sure you have experience in them where it's like, okay, let's say you are a yoga teacher and you're like, you did the journal exercise, you decided what your promise is, you understand what the vibe is, you're like, I'm going to commit to this thing. You can change your mind and shut down your yoga Instagram next month, and like no harm, no foul, no big deal. When you begin to move into physical world, it does actually get a little bit more like, I don't want to say complicated, but you do begin to invest in things. And this is the part where if you are ever going to print something, if you are ever going to slap something on a wall, like a big logo that you're going to pay someone thousands of dollars to, create this thing, I think definitely draw in professional help at that point, because the professionals are there to help. Maybe up front the cost feels really high, but in the long run might really help you. And I can think of times where, I've worked on a brand project and someone's determined that they're going to be, their name of their brand is going to be something. And we look it up and we're like, you can't copyright this. Like you literally cannot name yourself this, right? Someone else already is in the space with that name. So there is like a space, I think at a point you do need to get professional help. And also like, I think most people listening to this don't own a massive yoga studio, and they're just going to have their, Squarespace website. They're going to, get help from your friends. You're allowed to change your mind. I wanted to ask you, as someone who's like really grown this brand, these like incremental, can you think of times where you thought, oh, there was this like shift, my brand is shifting, maybe it's less about me and more about others? Is there like these moments where you're like, now's the time to invest, and like brand is, like, I'm just curious because
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. That's interesting. I think the way I'm wired, I'm such a feeler. I'm a very intuitive feeler. So as the previous examples that I've used with the different like iterations of my teaching and businesses, that sort of started first inherently for me in my process. So I think the brand was always kind of there because that was a vibe, that's an aesthetic, that's the easy part for my brain. Somebody else, that's going to be the hardest part for them. So for me, I think the challenges then of taking those more bigger leaps of faith of like, okay, I like again in 2017 was when I started to get the idea of turning this into more of like an online membership platform for yoga teacher trainings, because I was very clear in my brand and my niche as an anatomy informed teacher at that time, 2016, 2017. And I was starting to see posting on social that people were liking this. And this was a real zeitgeist kind of moment of a lot of teachers getting disillusioned with yoga, injuries, and not knowing how to teach well, and going like, wait a second, I maybe need to know more about movement and anatomy. And so I'd already kind of been doing that and recognized, oh, there's a niche here, there's a spot. So Brea as a teacher, and no matter what form that came in with like the brick and mortar studio and then into the online platform, I think my through line was always there. The brand, so to speak, was always kind of there, even if it changed names. Heart and Bones was not the name of my yoga studio back in the early 2000s. Back to what you were saying a little bit of like that leap of faith of like, okay, now taking that next more professional step. So for me, it was funneling that vibe as a teacher, what I was already doing, how I was teaching, who I was teaching was already there. I just had a vision then like, oh, we can scale this up. Let's put this online because this is reaching a global audience. And I know there's a real deficit in the market. There's not many other people doing this at this time. Why don't I go and do that? And so then that was sort of that next level of leap of faith. So that wasn't necessarily a brand thing, but it was taking the brand to another level, putting it in a slightly different iteration and way to reach our customers.
Yeah, so you're starting to grow it. And like, what does it
Yeah.
look like? I know you and I talk a lot about like, what does Heart and Bones look like beyond Brie? Because it is more than you. It is literally, there's all these teachers on the platform that it's not just about Brie. And it's like an interesting challenge to be constantly thinking about because you are the face of the brand.
Such a good part of brand and conversation. I know. And this comes up a lot with teachers. Absolutely. Because then it's that question, okay, well, wait, I have to have a website. Okay, well, am I Heart Flow Yoga or am I Sally Jones? I'm making this name up, obviously, but like sallyjonesyoga.com. Like, is it me? Is it not me? And so I think that's a question that I think is really important to ask and answer for yourself. And I don't think one is better than the other. For me, I knew that I never wanted it to be about me. I don't want to be a guru. I don't want this to be like breejohnsonyoga.com. And I knew from a business perspective, maybe this will do really well. Maybe in a beautiful place world, like this could sell down the road. And it would be easier to sell if it wasn't breejohnsonyoga.com. So these are kind of the layers of that. But number one, the heart of the heart and bones is that it never wanted, like, this is not about me. This is about the yoga. This is about our approach. This is about the way, again, the brand in a sense, like the way that we teach, what we want to offer for people, how we want to offer. And heart and bones is, yeah, it's like, it's about community. So I've always said in terms of that name, for example, like the heart and the bones, but the most important word in that name is the and, because it's that joining, that yoking. Let's bring it back to yoga, that yoking of the heart and the body, but also the community. And also about the social aspect of it, about each other. How can we grow as a community who are into the similar things? So the brand is also the people and who's part of the brand. And so, yeah, that's kind of it. So for me, I never really wanted it to be about me in that sense. So it had to be a clear decision to go, okay, heartandbonesyoga.com. Somebody else, it is them and it can be you. And one is not better than the other. I just know for myself, I wouldn't be comfortable. And even though most people think it is all about me, right? Because you do see my face mostly. But
I don't think it's about you, but it works when we use you. I use you very selfishly because it works. But I will say a very practical thing. I think I want to, going back exactly to what we said, I think if I were listening to this, here's what I would take away from what Brie just said. I think being clear on the future of what you want this to be. If you are like forever, I just want to be a solopreneur. I want to teach my classes and walk out the door. And maybe I teach workshops. Maybe down the road can have a retreat or something like that. And I'm happy to lead the charge on this one, then maybe just your name is fine. But if you're like, I would like to work with other teachers, maybe it goes beyond me, maybe I bring in new people, then yeah, maybe more of a corporate name makes sense. My one caveat, I'm laughing because I had to deal with this. I'm Polish, so my Polish name is like, it's not hard, but I don't think people could spell it easily. And so I chose not to use my name because I felt it was easier to remember a vibrant mind than Ula and my last name. Like, I just don't think people could spell it. So that's just like those considerations. They, have a little journaling session and think about where you want to be, not in 6 months, but in 5 years. And that could give you the answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's a huge point, Ula. That's so true. And also, too, yeah, you're making me think, like, what if you have a very common name? What if you're Sarah Jones and
Sarah Jones and Susie Q.
And so there's already like 12 sarahjonesyogas.com. And well, now, even though that's what you wanted, you can't do it. One's not the right answer. And I think we always we feel safety in the perception of a right answer, especially with this. And it really isn't. And that's always going back to your who, your what, your why. And thank you for bringing up the future and your future. And you might not know where exactly what you want, where you want it to go. And it may not go where you want it to go. In time, you might change your mind. And again, as we said before, you're allowed to do all of that. But it's like self-awareness. How do I want to do this?
What came up for me right now was like, brand is a living thing. Like, brand actually changes. And you can see that through Heart and Bones. Like, you and I, in the last couple of years, like both years, I gave you a brand doc. Brie is like it's like, I got this in my head. I'm like, right, but the person doing our PR can't read your mind. So we're going to give her a brand doc. So I think it's important to do those things. and we revisit them. I look at it and I think, do we still want to talk this way? Is this, like it's worth revisiting and it's not static? I think sometimes people think like, oh, but I've picked my brand, therefore it can never change. You can look at like massive corporations that rebrand. If they can do it, you can do it. Brand is a living thing. You're going to change as a human being. You're going to change as a teacher, and you can change your mind next year. It's a-okay. The thing where I brought up earlier about the cost side of things, it's like, okay, but if you do own a physical space, just be aware that you're going to pay to reprint something. But when you're online, it's so simple just to be like, you know what? It's fine. We can change the color. No big deal.
No, you're not going to lose customers. Or you think your business is going in one direction. You're like, I am going to teach this, and that, or like, or let's just say, because I know a lot of us listening are probably interested in this anatomy informed approach that we do here at Heart and Bones. And the anatomy informed approach is a pretty wide net. It's a specific niche in a way, but it's also kind of wide because that can be applied in so many different ways. Then you might go into it being like, well, I'm going to be teaching this anatomy informed approach and work with these types of people. And then you start doing it and you realize, wait, whoa, this is not who and how I want to teach. Or let's say you have your own like studio, or like you're renting out space. And again, I'm like Sally Jones, anatomy informed yoga classes.com. That's a horrible URL, by the way, but don't do that one. And then you realize that actually the people who keep showing up to your classes are totally not the people who you thought, but you're like, well, okay, I guess this is speaking to this type of group, and I don't mind this. I'm down with that. And then you sort of have to pivot a little bit, and maybe then that's great because your marketing goes, oh, okay, well, I can reach more of these people. We don't know until we're in it.
I actually just something caught in my brain. It's like this like tenuous link of brand loyalty and appealing to the masses. I don't want to call it a name because I think that's not us, but there is someone on in the online yoga space who has very anatomy based stuff, and they are very like white background, fancy skeleton animations and things like that, where it's like very leaning into the almost no brand. It's like the white wall of brands where you're like, it's really not about me. And it's like, okay, I get that. I get what you're doing here. You're trying to seem like anyone can take these classes. And at the same time, I have zero loyalty because all I care about is just that, like, you're going to, this one class about my knee pain or something, whatever, where I think like brand as a yoga teacher is like super interesting, and where I would encourage people to not be afraid to, show a little bit of their personality, which is I love happens on Heart and Bones Yoga. Like sometimes you do things on our, public, like marketing channels where you talk about tough issues or you talk about, world issues or something. And from, let's say, the traditional sense, people might be like, you should never do that because blah, blah, blah. But it's like, actually, that's like kind of our brand. Like, we're not afraid to do this kind of stuff. And I think of like, it's like Ben and Jerry, the ice cream people, they're political. Like, if they can do it, like, why can't we? So I think there is a space for, I don't feel like as a yoga teacher, you need to be this like perfect, I'm an anatomy pro, here's a skeleton, perfect drawing all the time, because it can actually just make you blend into everybody else. Like, there is space to be yourself.
And you also get, in my experience, when we've tried to go more generic, like, come and join this back thing, like, like, which we still do, but in our own brand flavor. But when we've tried the more generic thing, we don't get longevity with our customers. We get the people who are just looking for the quick solution of, like, I'm just going to use the back pain example of just like, well, I want the 5 things that are going to blah, blah, blah. And then they're not the people that we wanted. And so we didn't do a good enough filter of getting that. And so I think when you're the more generic you are, I don't think I guess it's that same of brand loyalty. And yeah, bringing, like, who are you? What do you want to stand for? I think that is a very tenuous, tricky position to be in. I think making choices, but that's where you got to have your brand values. Like, our values isn't just like, I don't want to teach a fully whitewashed practice of yoga. And I do want to call out ableism. I do want to talk about the systems of power because it's so inherently part of the world we're in. But you might be listening and going, well, I don't want to do that, or that's scary. And I've had online hate and comments and stuff. I've lost people for sure. And there's times. Okay, here's a fun example, because I think there's the fear when we really stand for something on whatever that level is, because that is what your brand is doing too. If we don't want to be a generic brand, as Ula mentioned, you do sort of have to like, and I don't mean politically necessarily like standing for something, but you are sort of like drawing a line, like this is us. This is not us, however that shows up for each of us. But for us as Heart and Bones, it does show up politically sometimes. Like, we are absolutely for trans rights. And if I've just said that and you're like, what? Great. Good. And if you want to leave, cool, like press
It wasn't
stop.
a secret. It was out
No.
all along.
No, but for example, when I've posted socially on that, like on social media over the years, I have like, I'm thinking of one moment in particular where somebody who was a member of our online studio sent an email, because I think I even talked about it in a newsletter to our members once. I don't know, because we're not going to shy away from this. It's not our whole personality, but it's just we have trans teachers in the studio, like, and the person sent an email going like, well, this like, how dare you? I thought Heart and Bones was blah, 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 blah. And just like was very mad and disappointed and decided to
Clutching their pearls.
and decided to tell me. So on the outside, these are the types of emails I think as teachers and businesses that we're scared of. But in this case, it didn't. Well, it deeply bothered me just fundamentally that somebody was that deeply transphobic that us talking about trans life and rights and whatnot was enough for them to like stop using Heart and Bones. Like, that just fundamentally, not us, but that's anyways, you know what I mean? Their beliefs were just sad to me. But was I sad that I lost their business because of that? Did that stop me moving forward talking about some of these issues because I would lose people? No. Because for me, there's that clarity of awareness and clarity of self. So it goes back again to that journal this stuff down. Who are you as a teacher? How are you? Again, you don't have to make it political deeply, but know that when you do create a brand on a lot of levels, people will fall away. And for me and Ben and Jerry's, I guess, and hopefully some other brands, like, right, we need to talk about this stuff. We need to talk about genocide. We need to not be afraid to, because what is yoga but change? Okay, there's my soapbox.
That's like a big part of yoga. It's like the yoga is more than a physical practice. So you're allowed to have these other things. Coming from a brand perspective, I think some of the things that make you uniquely you are the things that could attract the right person, right? Like, I can talk, okay, very basically me, like, I also am a photographer, and things I post about is hiking and being in the woods and being in nature. That is part of who I am as a photographer brand, right? That is part of my artwork. That's what I choose to do. I also show that I love coffee. Coffee is a big part of my thing. And I've even signed off emails to Brea being, this email was fueled by coffee, right? Because that's just who I am. And I want to talk to people about coffee. And that's a fun thing for me. It's not political by any means. I mean, it could be if you want to talk about coffee production. That said, it's a kind of a good exercise as well. Like, what are these little other aspects of you that you'd like to draw forward in the brand? Like, it's not going to show up obviously in the studio. You're not going to be in front of the room being like, and by the way, my cup of coffee this morning. But it could show up in making, let's say you're talking about that icky feeling, oh, maybe you don't like marketing. Maybe you don't want to take videos of yourself doing yoga. You don't have to take photos of yourself doing yoga. You don't have to take videos of yourself doing yoga. You don't have to post that on social media. You could literally take a video of yourself having your morning coffee and put some copy about, this is blah, blah, blah. That's your idea. Like, I think there's so many creative ways of showing yourself as a brand that are comfortable for who you are as a person. I don't think you need to be pressured to think that you have to have a certain vibe or feel or be on a beach in a bikini, like we brought up in a different episode. Like, there's so much space for different types of teachers.
Yeah, and there should be. And we should, like, here, I'm going to shit all over us, even though I'm always like, don't, should. But this is one of those things where, like, the deeper level of brand in the culture that we live in, because we can never unsee it, is we need representation. We need all bodies. We need all genders. We need all sexualities. We need to have that visual because we do live in a world that is like trying to homogenize us and trying to like marginalize so many of us that like we need all body types, big body, disabled body, like whatever like it is. So if you feel older bodies, like, so if you feel like you're not part of these, like, okay, well, if I'm going to brand myself that I don't look like everybody else, like lean into that, right? That is so powerful. We need to see. So this is why where the shoulding comes in. So like we should show up as ourselves in the way that we are and let that be, it doesn't have to be like completely your brand. Let's say you're in a larger body. That doesn't have to be the market that you teach, which is like people in larger bodies and whatnot. Like that could be if that's what you want, but just knowing that who you are in the body that you have is also important too. And that representation really does matter and helps to normalize these things for others. And then boom, there you're teaching.
Okay, I want to ask you, as a studio owner now that is online, what are some like takeaways or, I wish I had known this moments for someone that's looking to have an online studio or online brand as a yoga teacher? Are there any takeaways that you would say, gee, someone should have told me this?
I don't know. I'm still learning that, Ula. I think we're still, the heart of so many of our meetings and conversations with our H&B team is kind of that, like always trying to figure out, like we know who we are as a business, we know who and how we help and want to help and the way that we do it. And as you said before, it's a living, breathing thing that I think we're always going back to and questioning. So when we're like, okay, well, what kind of marketing do we want? What kind of like, or do we do PR? Do we do this? It kind of inherently is within brand. And maybe if somebody had told me that from the beginning, that it's like just because we have this like colors on the website, font that we've chosen, and the teachers that we and our approach, that it really is a living, breathing organism. And it's this ongoing practice of just figuring it out. And maybe that would have been nice if right away somebody had some magical mentor who came into my life and was like, hey, you're always going to be figuring this out. It's never going to be a straight line.
Such a strong takeaway that, like, even us from the outside, and I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations, because from the outside, we're like, wow, look at Brea, she's so successful. Wow, look at her, teacher training and her website, and she has a team. And internally, we're like, every week, we're like debating these things, and we're, should we change what the landing page looks like? Oh, what about these emails? Do we change? Maybe we should do graphics for email. Like, there's so much constant conversation because brand and marketing is a living thing and it's always changing. And we are not, yeah, we're experts, but we're like experts because we know we don't know everything. I think that's like the bigger piece, and we're willing to try stuff. I would say, if I had to say, like, beyond the homework that we've already given, if you don't have direct access to a brand person, a designer, or anyone like that, I would, as a yoga teacher, be open to feedback. And I would ask people for help. I would reach out to a couple trusted people that maybe it's your ideal audience, find that avatar, and maybe it's a friend of yours. You wish more people like her would show up in your class. So go to that person and maybe show them your website, maybe show them your Instagram, and just kind of let the ego go for a second, because I think very human nature is to assume that first thing we came up with is the correct answer. And it might not be. So brand is not static. Feedback is great. It's only going to make you better and attract the right people.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to take those leaps and just lean into it and try. We talk about brand so anytime I'm ever teaching teachers, unless it's a very specific workshop about like anatomy or movement or whatnot, there's any sort of training like our mentorship and the teacher training, the brand, marketing, business stuff always is included. And it's always in the same sort of perspective like we're talking here. It's like really demystifying it, normalizing it, encouraging, getting you clear and excited to share this practice in the way that you can show up and share it with a little bit more confidence.